Hey, this is Jeff. Earlier this week, we released a special episode about the discovery of a gentle giant honeybee in the Solomon Islands. That show dropped on April 1st. This episode with Sven-Erik Spichiger is real, and so are the Asian Giant Hornets that he talks about. With that out of the way, let's get on with the show. Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast, presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey, Jeff and Kim. Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hives protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Now is a great time to consider what type of patty is right for your area and your honeybees. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you out of their manufacturing plants in Airdrie, Alberta, and in Butte, Montana, or from distribution depots across the continent. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
We want to thank Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today, and while you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping Your First 3 Years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a new quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinator insects, both wild and managed, before they disappear. The magazine is full of beautiful photos and informative articles from authors such as Dr. Marla Spivak, Dr. Mark Winston, and our very own Kim Flatham. Learn more on our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor Kirsten Trainer and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. Hey, Kim, we've got a good podcast lined up today. In a little bit, we'll be talking with Sven-Erik Spichiger. He's going to kill me for butchering his name of the whole show. From the Washington State Department of Agriculture Invasive Species Program. He'll bring us up to date on last fall's discovery of the Asian Giant Hornet in Washington near the Canadian border north of Seattle.
I gotta tell you, Jeff, I'm glad that creature is in your state and not mine, and you can have it forever. We don't want it. I'm really interested in hearing what he has to say, because they've worked with trapping them and all of the things that are going to pertain to keeping them in Washington or even getting rid of them in Washington. So I'm going to be interested in what he has to say.
Yeah, being on the Washington State Beekeepers Association email list and everything, I received the notices that they were found last fall. And at that point, I did some Googling and some YouTube videos. And you know what? If one of those hit your windshield going down the interstate, you'd know it. I mean, it would be like a pigeon hitting your windshield. And I can't imagine stumbling onto a hive of these hornets. Or having them attack your hive. I'd rather have a bear attack them, I think.
I think you're right. Bears just go for the honey. These guys go for, I guess it's the larvae they go for, right?
Yeah. And you can put a fence up for bees or bears, not for these sons of guns. Well, yeah, it'll be a good interview. I'm looking forward to it. All right, well, let's get on with the rest of the show and this week's listener's question. Kim, this week's question comes from Kara S. She writes, I've never kept bees before, but have always considered them a great asset. I started listening to your podcast in preparation for my packages of bees due to arrive April 2nd. I have 2 hives ready to go, one a traditional tin frame and one an Appy May hive. I live in northeastern Ohio, and I'm curious of the benefits or differences of these hives will have in compared to the traditional wooden hive. And her second, you want to answer that question first, and then we'll go to her second.
Well, we'll just briefly look at it. The April hive, of course, is plastic, and it's well insulated, and it's got latches and snaps, so it's not going to fall apart. It's a pretty fancy piece of equipment, I got to tell you. I've never worked one. I've seen them, but I've never worked with one. But from what people tell me who have them, management is just pretty much traditional, except you've got better insulation, so they're going to be cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. But as far as taking care of bees, you still got to have enough room, and you still got to do all of the things when you got to do them the same way you are going to with that wooden hive. So what you do to one, you're going to be doing to the other. The difference is going to end up being in how long the equipment lasts, because it isn't going to rot or fall apart, and overwintering, especially in Northeast Ohio.
And you have some plastic hives there, or you did when you were running them there at the Root Company, didn't you?
Yeah, we've got two different kinds, and we had one at the Root Company, still have it. I have one in my backyard, still have it, and the insulation value of them goes a long way in terms of keeping bees cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. If there's a downside to them, it's the cost, but if you look at long term, they're going to last longer. So higher initial investment, but longer time you have them, because equipment just basically doesn't wear out.
Yeah, and as long as you take care of it, right? You can't throw it around. All right, let's look at our second question now. It goes: my neighbors have kids and a pool. In your beginning beekeeping series, you spoke about watering your bees and making sure you have water that is attractive to bees. How does one make water more attractive to bees? I have a pond on my property and will be facing my bees away from my neighbor's yard. And thankfully, we have 10 to 20 foot tall trees between our yard and their pool. But I just don't want to face any issues with their children being afraid of or being stung by bees. How can she handle the water?
Yeah, that's always bees like water. A swimming pool puts off a great big chlorine gas cloud above it that says water here, and but then so does your pond. So the first thing I would do is I'd put a Boardman feeder on the front of that hive with water in it, and put just a smidgen of Honey Bee Healthy in that water, and it gives it an aroma, and that they're going to learn water. This is what water smells like, and I would keep them on that for a while. But I'd also go over and watch the neighbor's pool on a hot day, in the middle of a hot day, to see if there's bees over there, to make sure that what you're doing is working.
Yeah.
And after a while, what I might do then is I'd go down and I'd put just an old bowl of water right on the pond shore with some Honey Bee Healthy water in it. And that way, if they go to the pond, they're going to go, oh, this smells like water. It's water we've been getting at home. I mean, this is kind of overkill, but
neighbors, you never know.
Kids and bees and water can be an ugly mix, and if you're going to get started off and immediately you got people mad at you, beekeeping isn't going to be fun. So, I guess I'd go for the overkill.
Yeah, the only thing I would think of, if she's just getting started too, I might, if possible, put the colonies or the new hives closer to the pond than the pool, so the water source is closer and more attractive to the bees than the neighbor's pool. If she has that option.
Yeah, if you got that option, that's definitely a good choice. Yep.
Very good.
So, good luck.
All right. Well, thanks, Kara, for your question and for listening to Beekeeping Today podcast. Hey, Kim, what book did you pull from your shelf for us this week?
I got a new one that's coming out in June, Jeff. I got it from Northern Bee Books. And it's called Honey Bee Drones, Specialists in the Field, and it's by Grain Kingham, and it's published, like I said, by Northern Bee Books. I got to tell you, it's about time somebody wrote this book. In my opinion, drones are totally overlooked, mostly frowned upon, and they're neglected by both bees and beekeepers. I happen to have had a more than passing interest in this honeybee the whole of my beekeeping time, so thank you, Graham. And he covers the whole drone, Jeff. External and internal anatomy, production and development, their role in the colony, mating behavior and biology and anatomy, congregation areas, genetics, and what problems that they have in the hive. Think varroa here. Plus a huge selection of photos, excellent photos I'll add, explaining all of this, and a lot of drawings to help you understand what you're looking at. Jeff, do you know why drones are bigger than workers?
No.
Well, when you read this book, you're going to find out why, but I'm not going to tell you now. You're going to have to get the book to find out. So, the book, Honeybee Drones, Specialists in Their Field. It's a great overview of this too often overlooked hive resident. But you can't have bees without them. So the more you know, the better off you and your bees will be. It's a quick read and a great reference. Get your copy today from Northern Bee Books.
All right. Well, let's get into our interview with Sven-Erik Spichiger and talk about the Asian Giant Hornet that's invading Washington today. Welcome, Sven, to the Beekeeping Today podcast. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Nice to meet you, Sven.
The Asian Giant Hornet is now invading the state of Washington, and this made quite a bit of news here locally. I'm in Olympia. You're based out of Olympia, I believe.
That's correct.
And yeah. Now, Kim, sitting in Ohio, may not have a great urgency about that, but I know the local beekeepers in the Olympia area and north of Seattle are pretty concerned about the Asian Giant Hornet, and we invited you here to talk a little bit about what the state of Washington knows and is doing to prepare for it.
Well, let me tell you a little bit about what all happened. The story actually goes back to probably July of 2019 when in Vancouver, British Columbia, they intercepted a single specimen of a different hornet, which was first misidentified and then identified correctly a little bit later. As a species that's known to occur only in Southeast Asia. So this is always kind of cause for alarm. And in fact, here at the Washington State Department of Agriculture, we have a number of these hornets kind of on our watch list because we think they are capable of jumping ship and kind of making it over here and able to establish. In fact, there's 23 species of true hornets in the world, and among them is the Asian giant hornet, Vespa mandarinia. A little bit later that year, the city of Nanaimo, unfortunately, detected, basically with the help of some beekeepers, a complete Asian giant hornet nest, which they were able to go into and eradicate. And so that was a bit of an eye-opener for everybody as well. And then,
so just for the listeners who aren't familiar with the Pacific Northwest, I can't say it now. Nanaimo is on Vancouver Island, about halfway up on the eastern shore.
Yeah, so it's just a little north of our northern border with Canada, basically. Mm-hmm. Pretty quick drive, but there's some water that separates it and us, so you feel a little safe, but not really. Unbeknownst to us, a little later in the year, an individual turned in a picture of another Asian giant hornet in a community called White Rock. And White Rock, literally, if you go to the border between Canada and Washington State, is directly on the other side of the border. And so that's a lot closer and a little uncomfortable. No specimen was ever recovered, but it was pretty clear that that's what this was, and they were able to corroborate that the photograph was in fact taken in White Rock by visiting the site. And so we started to become a little more antsy. Probably around September or so, we started publishing a couple of publications that basically encourage Washington residents to look for invasive species, and in that is basically one page dedicated to different kinds of hornets. Ones that you're familiar with in the eastern half of the United States, which is an invasive called European hornet or Vespa crabro, so a different species. That doesn't occur here, so we wanted folks to look out for that. And of course, we listed Asian giant hornet and a few others. And around December 8th, a resident in Blaine, and Blaine is the town that sits right next to White Rock on the United States side of the U.S.-Canada border, came outside one morning, December 8th, which was a Saturday, and saw what looked to be an Asian giant hornet sitting basically right in front of the door. Now, if you go to the website or you do a little bit of internet searching, you will understand why you would have noticed this had it actually been there before. So we're pretty certain that was the first time it ever appeared on his doorstep. And he actually posted pictures of it on Reddit. And apparently someone had seen one of our booklets or something and said, hey, you need to report this, which they did. They used the Washington Invasive Species Council app to report this. And we got the report Monday, which was the 10th of December, and we were able to arrange a meeting with them on the 12th. Driving all the way up to the border was not a waste of time. They had kept the specimen, and it sure looked like Asian Giant Hornet. As a matter of fact, we were sure of it almost immediately, but we went through the motions of sending it through the system officially, and we do this for a number of reasons. Occasionally, when we find a pest, there are regulatory implications, and when that happens, you definitely want to have a real vouchered specimen that goes through a chain of custody. And so that's a step we took. And by the 14th, we had an official confirmation back from the United States Department of Agriculture. And it was basically confirmed as a first detection in the United States, which is always kind of a little scary when you get something new, because you never know just what it's going to do.
Wait, just before you go on, for our listeners, can you give a visual description of what an Asian Giant Hornet actually looks like?
Sure. Actually, when you first encounter it in person, it looks like a toy. It's a freakishly large hornet with a massive orange-yellow head. And the head is disproportionately large to the body. And trust me, you will know when you're looking at Asian Giant Hornet after you've seen it the first time, because it's about 2 inches long, and there really is just nothing else running around out there that looks like this. We do have some similar species, but nothing looks quite this menacing.
So it's about the size of a thumb, then, if you were to...
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, then, Sven, just for distance, for those of us who aren't geographically familiar with the place you're talking about, from the eastern side of Vancouver Island to the border of Canada, where it was first collected, when you guys first collected it, there's some distance there. What kind of, this thing is naturally migrating, apparently, right?
Well, that was an assumption some folks have made, but we actually got some DNA evidence back this week. We've been working with our counterparts in Canada. We did actually send all of our specimens, both Canada and the U.S., off for DNA analysis with Dr. Takahashi in Japan. He's kind of the world's leading authority on most of the hornet groups. After running some DNA analysis, and they got a little sidetracked with something else that's going on, running test samples. I think we all know what that is, but he did get back to us earlier this week, and the genetics from the Nanaimo colony, which is the one from British Columbia, Canada, match up really well with Asian Giant Hornet that's found in Japan. The United States samples, so the one we collected in Blaine, they seem to match up pretty well with ones that are found in Korea. Now, this is all unofficial at this time, but it's looking like separate introductions. So they're not really migrating. Wow. It's just a solemn reminder. And you remember this starts back in July with the detection of a different bad hornet species that they seem to be able to hitch rides either in combination with trade or some other venue, and they are able to establish when they get here. Our story doesn't end December 8th. When we actually originally collected that specimen, the property owner came out and said, well, after seeing it, we're certain we saw another one flying around later that day. He said it was up at my downspouts, and he points up to his downspouts, and there also happens to be a hummingbird feeder hanging there, which makes a lot of sense. Late in the year, worker hornets and yellow jackets will go after sugary substances. You may have been bothered at a football game or something with a soda by a yellow jacket. Everybody, I think, has experienced that once or twice in their life. And he said it flew off in an eastern direction. And now these things usually go straight back to their nest. So we believe there was actually a colony somewhere just to the east of that property, but we were not able to locate it because it was so late in the year. Apparently, there were some other things happening. So because, and for the listeners, this hornet isn't only the largest hornet in the world, it's extremely dangerous. It is responsible for 20 to 40 deaths in Japan every year. And that's just from interactions with it when somebody stumbles onto a nest and gets stung. Most people can survive a single sting, but if you get multiple stings, it can be a really life-threatening situation. In fact, in China, in 2013, conditions were pretty bad for these, and it put field workers kind of in close proximity to them. And there were 43 fatalities just in that year alone in one small part of China. And
their venom's especially toxic, isn't it?
It's very similar to the venom of the things that we have here, but there's a couple of key differences. Number one, it causes a necrosis around the sting site. And so what that means is the flesh around where the person is stung actually starts melting. So if you get multiple stings, the melting flesh gets into your bloodstream and can start having negative impacts on your organs, things like your kidneys and your liver. And so even if you do survive, you could end up on dialysis or something even worse. I mean,
good grief.
It's really not something you want to mess around with. We call this an apex predator. Some people have asked me, does anything prey on this? The answer is no. I mean, nothing messes with this. It's a pretty nasty. It's a pretty nasty character out there, and unfortunately, we may be dealing with it here.
And the stinger is was reading up to a 1/4 inch long. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And
oh my gosh,
I've taken some close-up pictures of it. It's actually 2 pieces, and on either side there are some small barbs, so it almost looks like a small serrated cutting tool. It's a pretty scary looking thing under the microscope, but you really don't actually need a microscope to see the stinger on this. So because this is such a dangerous thing, we didn't feel we should sit on the information. So we put out a very modest blog just alerting Washington residents that we had in fact intercepted this, and it kind of went viral. It ended up on CNN, New York Times, everywhere. And this was the week of Christmas. So I was sitting there Christmas Eve with our assistant answering many, many phone calls and looking at many people's cell phone pictures that they had taken of various scary things throughout the year. And we appreciated every single one of those reports because 2 or 3 of them turned out to be what we believe are additional reports of Asian Giant Hornet. One of them actually came from a professor at WSU who had received a report of an apiary being attacked earlier in the year, and they were just holding on to try to confirm it. They did eventually receive the sample, and it turns out that was about 1 kilometer away from where we collected ours. So we believe that particular attack on an apiary was linked to this original detection that we had. Another beekeeper in a town called Custer, which is roughly 5 miles south, maybe not even that much, had several strong colonies and had one where all of the bees were just laying outside decapitated, and he was able to get a few photos of that. Now, we'll never know for sure if it was Asian Giant Hornet that took this out, but all the hallmarks are there. So what's kind of interesting and terrifying for beekeepers is this particular hornet eats many different kinds of insects, but really seems to like European honeybees. In its native range, where they use a species called Apis cerana, or the Japanese honeybee, that bee has actually adapted a defense mechanism. It can surround a hornet that's attacking the hive in a ball and basically cook it or asphyxiate it to death. And so they can actually protect themselves. European honeybees, when they tried to mount Apis mellifera over in Asia, just were absolutely annihilated. They have zero defense against Asian giant hornet. And in fact, a healthy honeybee hive of about 30,000 or more can be destroyed by just 20 hornets in only a few hours. They will kill every single bee in there. And we refer to this as the slaughter phase. And we had a few beekeepers calling in this type of behavior happening to them. We can't really corroborate the reports because there's no physical evidence or photographic evidence, but their account is spot on. And so the one in Custer sounds exactly like Asian Giant Hornet, and he did have photos, and there were piles of decapitated bee bodies. And what his comment to me was, he was disappointed that his ladies didn't take out any of the attackers, which really does kind of speak that it's not one of our native vespids or yellow jackets that did this. It really does sort of lean towards it being an Asian Giant Hornet attack.
Sven, if I can interrupt you for a second. A group of these hornets attack a honeybee colony and they kill all of the adults. Then they are grabbing the larvae and taking them back to feed their young?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So they just kill everybody there and then take all the kids and there's nothing left.
Right. And so a lot of folks have asked us, what kind of size mesh excluder can I put on it to protect them? And right now, we're not really making recommendations because it's our thought that it doesn't really matter because they lure the honeybees out of the hive. So even if you do manage to save the queen and the brood, there won't be any workers left and it's going to die anyway. So you would really just be wasting your time. Right now, we have Timothy Lawrence, who is one of our extension agents from Island County, which is kind of up that way, where all this is happening, working on beekeeper recommendations, and those are going through review right now, and hopefully they will have those for us very soon. So that's kind of the good news is some folks have been dealing with this for hundreds of years over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. So it's not completely new. And we do hope that we'll have some good, solid recommendations from WSU right now. What WSDA, my organization, is focusing on is trying to figure out just how established this is and, if possible, wiping it out. One of the scary things for us, and the last report I investigated highlights this perfect, apparently on August 8th of 2019, less than a mile from that probable Custer bee kill, a farmer was mowing a field. He sped through the property on a big tractor just to check to see what the back of the property looked like. And as he came out of a kind of a corridor that has woods on either side, a large 2-inch long hornet with a huge yellow head came up and started repeatedly stinging his windshield. Oh. Now, you could mistake a few other things for Asian giant hornets, but none of them have a behavior of repeatedly stinging. And that's kind of what makes this dangerous. If you're somebody who's, say, mowing a roadside, if you're a landscaper, if you're a hunter, somebody walking their dog on a park trail. And by the way, the Nanaimo nest was 5 feet off of a trail in a public park in the middle of downtown Nanaimo. I mean, they're very lucky they didn't have an incident. These particular insects will defend their nest with great vigor. And unfortunately, they nest in the ground. So it makes it a very dangerous situation if we get nests of these established here in Washington, because although they do like to go to a wood line or a wooded area, most of our wooded areas are sort of surrounded with Himalayan blackberry here. And so getting in to control it is going to be very difficult. And if you're running a brush mower or something like that, and you don't happen to have a cab with a windshield like this farmer did, your life would actually be in pretty severe risk, because before you knew what was happening, you would probably have received multiple stings.
Wow. I've seen pictures of those sting marks on people's arms online and the necrosis at the sting sites. I mean, I've been bit by spiders. Have done that to my skin, but to have a big old 2-inch hornet on your arm, gnawing away and stinging at the same time, that would be horrendous.
Well, the other thing I wanted to mention quickly, you mentioned ground nesting and cavity nesting close to the ground, old rotten stumps and things like that too, and they're difficult to see if you go looking for them, as I understand it.
Right. So that's we do actually have a protocol. There's a couple of things we're thinking of trying. The folks in Europe, and you'll see a lot of information on the internet about this, are dealing with something called Asian Hornet. So not Asian Giant Hornet, but Asian Hornet. And this is a different species. It's Vespa velutina. They nest up in trees. So they're able to capture live adults, put a radio tag on them, and follow them back and find it. Unfortunately for us, since these nest under the ground, once the radio tag goes under the ground, we lose the signal. And so you're out $285 or some such thing. So we did actually have a suggestion to tie the tag off of a string, and that way when they crawl down in, the tag would stay outside the ground. But because of all of the blackberries and things like that, we just imagine that getting hung up in the vegetation. So one of the things that the beekeepers in Nanaimo did was they looked at the multiple reports they had, and they kind of triangulated in the direction that they were seen flying away. And that kind of gets you close. Obviously, it's dangerous. When they were first locating this, the first person on the scene actually was stung in the chest because they wandered up to it a little too fast. We actually had our safety unit generously buy us a FLIR thermal imaging camera. And as it turns out, you can kind of see hornet nests on these, mostly because they keep it around 89 degrees. And as long as you go in the evening or when it's cooled down, it actually is probably going to light up like a Christmas tree. So if we can get close to the area, we should be able to zero in using the FLIR that our safety team bought us. So we basically did order some hornet suits from China. Typical beekeeping gear will do absolutely nothing for you. As we mentioned earlier, the stinger's 6 centimeters long or almost a 1/4 inch long. It'll go right through just about any type of clothing you want to wear. The beekeeper suits are interesting. They're like a very thick foam. Then they have like a cloth mesh weave on the outside. There's a fan in the helmet, and they don't have a mesh face shield, but a kind of more solid face shield. They seem to be, I would feel comfortable attempting to do this with the hornet suits we have on them, other than the style. We do kind of look like a circa 1950s space movie, but, best just to be safe. So what we've taken the initiative here to do is to develop some eradication protocols and just instruct everybody who thinks they may have encountered one to let us handle the first several at least. And we will be the folks who take out any nests that are located. Life cycle of this goes pretty much like this. Queens overwinter either mated or unmated in a chamber in the soil or in a void. They start emerging in the spring. We don't know exactly when, but probably around April. They start feeding on tree sap. All of the literature and a lot of our colleagues in both Japan and Korea say they prefer oak tree sap, which is probably a good thing because there's not a lot of oak trees up where we found this. So maybe it will hinder them in getting strongly established. But we're also going to be checking the sap of, maple trees and also alders probably. But focusing on oak, and they will then form a colony and start first batch of workers. Eventually, those workers will take over and the queen will no longer leave the colony. This is early summer. During the early summer, the adults will fly around picking off different types of insects like beetles, sometimes individual honeybees, not too dangerous at this point. It's towards late summer and early fall when they enter the slaughter phase, is what it's called, where they will target usually a honeybee nest or another wasp nest or even a nest of their own species that's not theirs. They will actually attack each other. And they'll go and they'll take it out, and then they'll harvest the pupae and the larvae that are there, feed that to their young. And at this point, new breeding cast drones, so males and virgin queens, will be produced. They will hatch out, mate pretty close to the nest actually, and then disperse. We don't know how far they'll disperse. That doesn't seem to appear in any of the literature anywhere. We do know that foraging happens within about 5 miles, but they stay within about a mile usually. And so, in theory, all of the sightings that we saw in the Blaine area, if you draw the circle right, could link back to just one colony, but we're not taking any chances. We're going to treat them all like they're kind of a separate colony.
Are the queens and the drones and the workers all the same size, or are they different sizes?
They're completely different sizes. We originally started with a few specimens from Nanaimo, and the specimens that we collected, and then we purchased a few to make displays for education, and those were all workers. And then about a week ago, we had a colleague in Japan mail us several hundred queens and several hundred workers. And if the workers look like a giant toy, the queens, put them to shame.
Wow. I mean, it'd be like a transformer toy sitting there on your desk, is what I'm imagining. I mean, that size.
I actually have some here. I can hold them up if you want to see them.
Yeah, please do.
It'll take me 2 seconds.
That's fine.
Those of us who don't live in Washington really wish you would keep them out there.
I'm not sure how well you can see that.
Yes. Yeah, hold it back just a little bit. Yeah, like that. Oh, wow.
So you can see they're not tiny at all.
No.
What I'm looking at, Jeff, they are bigger than the mice I have in the basement.
Yeah. Yeah, they would snack on one of those mice.
Yes, I think they would.
Oh my gosh! And I have to apologize to our listeners because this is probably not the best week to be talking about the gloom and doom of these giant wasps coming into the United States. But these are big. These are bigger than any hornet you'll have ever seen.
Yep.
And I used to think a cicada killer was big, but this is bigger than that. The Hive Butler, designed by a frustrated beekeeper to make beekeeping easier, cleaner, and more enjoyable. Don't extract honey the same day you pull honey frames? Stop using cheap office totes and dirty coolers to hold your honey treasure. The Hive Butler is U.S. made, ready to go, and able to handle the heavy work of a honey harvest. Beyond that, the Hive Butler can help you collect swarms, protect your queens, and make hive management easier. See the full line at www.thehivebutler.com. Order online and ask your favorite bee retailer to carry Hive Butler products. The Hive Butler, working even when you're not.
Sven, you mentioned that during the summer the workers are foraging and they're catching beetles and things. These two are brought back to the nest and fed to the young?
Absolutely. And then the workers...
What do the adults live on then? What are the adults eating during all this time?
So what's interesting is they'll form a meatball out of what they capture, bring it back, feed it to the young, and then the young will actually secrete kind of a nice gooey substance that the adults can then eat. So they depend on their young to feed them. That's actually a good thing because there are some strategies for taking these out that include feeding them bait laced with fipronil, which is what is in a flea collar usually, and is a pretty powerful insecticide. However, none of those are approved for use here yet in the United States. There's a few on the market in Japan, and we've actually already been working with FDA and EPA and a few of the pesticide companies to see what we might have available. Currently, that type of system is used to bait for cockroaches and ants and other things like that. And there are a few granular yellow jacket pesticides on the market. And so we may be able to come up with bait stations designed specifically for these. So a lot of that stuff is kind of already in the works.
There's a lot of information in the literature on traps. and using a clear glass bottle with a larger opening because they're too big to go through a normal opening, as I understand it. But you're using something for bait in the bottom. What's the bait that you're using?
Okay, so we're actually using a plastic 2-liter bottle, if you will, and we're basically using the ones that have been used in the city of Nagoya for years and years and years in their Hornet program. So Nagoya's in Japan, and they kind of trap these out of public parks and things as a safety measure. They've found that putting 3 2-centimeter holes in the top of a 2-liter bottle and then filling it with different types of bait has been very effective. The bait we kind of landed on, because it's easy for everybody to kind of obtain themselves, is a 1-to-1 mixture of orange juice and rice wine. And the reason for the rice wine is actually to exclude bees and other things like bumblebees. Apparently will not come to something that has a little bit of ethanol in it. And there's a few studies that show this. The rice wine is particularly nice because it's already cut to about 10%, and most people can purchase it with little trouble at their local grocery store. So that's what we're going to try. There are some other baits. There's a fermented milk bait that is highly touted by that same wasp trapping program over in Japan. And then there's a number of other things that will work just fine. But since these seem to be targeting apiaries, and our goal is to protect apiaries, we have to be very careful about the types of baits that we recommend, as honeybees will come to a lot of these as well if you don't have some sort of a deterrent, kind of like the rice wine in it. When we trapped for hornets and wasps in a former job I had in Pennsylvania, we used straight up brown sugar water, and we caught lots of Vespa crabrow or European hornet, but we did also get quite a few bumblebees and honeybees in these types of traps as well. So we're trying to make sure we're not doing any harm while we're trying to do some good.
Is there any advantage to trying to trap these in the springtime when the queens are just getting going, just like we do our regular yellow hornets or the bald-faced hornets, trapping them in the spring before the nests build?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, if you are fortunate enough to catch a queen here in the spring, you're obviously stopping a colony from getting going. The thing of it is, it's kind of a low percentage activity, and you will hang a trap and probably not see anything if you're here in Washington for a while.
I hope so.
But yeah, most of these traps are very effective on the workers later in the year. And so for us to, kind of really get the public going and get some help, having more sets of eyes out there, if people are willing to run traps, it's going to be a more productive activity starting in August when the workers are kind of out and about and starting to look for these types of things.
Is it going to pay beekeepers to put traps in or near apiaries, do you suppose?
We're probably not going to pay anybody to do it. Right now, I don't actually have funding to pay my own tax.
I guess I wasn't even thinking of being paid, just as a protective measure. If I got 4 traps in an apiary, is there going to be less opportunity for a forager in August to find my apiary, go to the trap rather than to one of my beehives?
Well, we're certainly already working with the beekeepers up in Whatcom County, which is where Blaine is. They've formed an Asian Giant Hornet task force, and they've signed up 38 apiaries to assist us with at least the detection trapping. Early on, we're going to be doing an experimental trap with them. The Canadians are also running a version of this, which basically has them wounding an oak tree and surrounding that wound with a glue board, and then putting like a bird excluder around it so we're not catching birds as well. But we feel from talking to some of our colleagues in Japan and Korea that this is the best hope we would have in the spring. Everybody also seems to think that any overwintering queens or nests were probably located near apiaries, because they don't feel like the food sources are good enough to support a nest anywhere else. But there's really not a lot behind that because we don't know what we're dealing with. What I can say is that not every habitat in the United States is suitable for these. If you think of places like southern China, Japan, the coastline here in Washington is ideal, which is unfortunate for us here on the western side of Washington, but we do believe as you get to the other side of the mountains and start getting into eastern Washington that the habitat is really not that suitable for it. And so it may be restricted a little in that way. But again, we won't know because it's never been here before. And the European hornet on the East Coast seems to be doing fine just about wherever it goes. So, you know.
So it's possible it might be stuck on this side of the Cascades.
It's possible. Let's hope not.
If it doesn't yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, the question, another question that I have is, how on earth did it get here? Okay.
Unfortunately, we're never really going to know. The most likely source is, Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver, Portland, all the way down to Los Angeles, get hundreds of thousands of shipments of commerce throughout the year to the very, very busy ports that are here. A mated queen finding a container to overwinter in is not that far-fetched a scenario. She gets here, she leaves, finds a suitable place to establish, and is able to generate a colony, and then the next year spreads. Other folks eat these. So in some of the rural areas of Japan, these are highly sought-after food items, and there are people that actually risk their lives, go out, harvest the brood of Asian giant hornets and sell them at local farmers markets. And in fact, Customs and Border Patrol has, on at least 2 occasions here in the West Coast, intercepted passengers carrying the brood of hornet nests, which, it's whatever. All of us, when we travel to a new place, like to take things that make us feel comfortable, but it's highly illegal. So fortunately, those were intercepted, but it's possible. There is a product on the market called hornet juice, if you will, or Zap or Yaz. I can't remember what it's called exactly, but this is basically the extract from hornet larvae that is fed to the adult hornets. And an Olympic athlete in Japan kind of made this product famous by winning a marathon for the first time, drinking this, claiming that it gave her, superior athletic ability. And so this is an actual product. Now, it's synthetic, but a lot of my new neighbors here in Washington and Oregon, they're organic folks. And so you could see some misguided individual, meaning well, trying to fill a niche market, attempting to start a colony of these and accidentally having them escape. Hopefully not, but that is a possibility. Nefarious.
How would you like to be known as a Dr. Kerr of the Asian Giant Hornet?
Well,
thank you. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
The opportunity of it escaping your part of the world and coming to my part of the world then exists in that a mated queen in August, September, October could hole up in an empty super on a truck that's being shipped back to Ohio to get restocked to pollinate almonds next spring. And I could end up with them. So it does exist, it sounds like.
Well, absolutely. So the other part of my job is we're constantly responding to introductions of Japanese beetle from the East Coast, introductions of European gypsy moth from the East Coast that come in wonderful things like cargo planes, people's RVs and campers, shipping pods from when people move from the East Coast to the West Coast. And guess what? That works both ways. Some of the things that we have here in the West certainly could end up in the East.
Well, we'd certainly like to encourage you to check out some of those things before they leave your place.
Absolutely.
Wow. I'm in awe of this insect. It's incredible.
It does seem to capture folks' attention. Our legislative liaison, when speaking to legislators, takes a Riker mount we prepared with just the worker specimen for now. Wait till we give her one with a queen specimen. And apparently our legislators are fairly impressed or terrified by it when shown the actual specimen.
Appropriate.
Well, which is a valid point, because now with the current COVID problems that we're all dealing with, how has, and maybe it'd be too early to answer this, but how do you expect the COVID problems to impact the summer plans for monitoring, trapping, or eradicating this Asian giant hornet?
Well, there are already some challenges. I'm talking to you from home today because we're ordered to work from home if we're able to do so, which is a great maneuver. It's just fine. But when you're trying to do things like assemble a tree tapping kit for some apiaries and get them delivered, when you're basically non-essential travel is restricted, it does kind of make it difficult. We were hoping to hold town hall meetings to show people how to construct the traps and how to mix the bait. That obviously is not going to be happening anytime soon. We wanted to work with some of the local grocery stores to get vouchers for rice wine and orange juice for those who volunteer and agree to collect data. The grocery stores, believe it or not, seem to be busy with other things right now.
Yeah.
Like toilet paper.
Slightly.
Yeah. So I think all of these things are still going to happen. But obviously, everybody's very concerned about this pest and they want them to happen immediately. And fortunately, unless we're going to get lucky and catch a few in the spring, and I would say we would be very lucky to catch queens in the spring. I don't think we have trapping worked out for that quite as well as we would like to, but we are testing the new one, of course. I think we do actually have until the summer to really start a really aggressive trapping campaign. And then, of course, there's getting our crews together to respond to it. We've never responded to an Asian giant hornet nest eradication event before. Our protocols are new. Obviously, you do learn about these things as you're going sometimes. This time, though, for me, it's a little concerning because for the first time, there was a chance when I sent a crew out that they could come back dead. And that was kind of a new thing in my career. And now that we have COVID-19 restrictions through several of our counties, that has come up a second time in very short order. And so I know we've released a lot of emergency funding for COVID-19. I'm told we have some emergency funding to get us up and running as well, because this is also a human health threat. So, we're hoping everything will, all of the funding will fall into place. And we do have, a funding package in with the federal government. And I understand that's under very serious consideration, mostly to protect the pollination industries, of course. But we're going to get through. We're going to be responding to it regardless of whether or not we get funding. We do have some local funds we can use. We've already done quite a bit of outreach work. There's Riker mounts with specimens going out to extension more and more every day. The ones I just showed you seem to take forever to dry, so we'll have some new ones available soon. I'm already working with my counterparts in the neighboring states to make sure that they have, some display material and some literature. And of course, we'll provide them whatever training we can whenever we're allowed to all meet together again. But I
will tell our listeners that you guys have done an exceptional job of getting information on the web. And we will have those websites on our webpage for people to click into. But the life cycle and the description and the pictures and all of the above that you just talked about is you've done, like I said, exceptional work getting that information out there. So kudos to you for making that happen and letting the rest of the world know what you're up against. So our viewers can be ready. I'm pretty sure, like every invasive species that's ever tried, we're not going to get rid of it. Although it would be really nice if you did. I'm going to guess that some will escape, and they need to be aware of it.
Well, there is the possibility that this was just the first year, and they won't survive. It's a slim possibility, and I'm never that lucky. But that is our fondest hope. The fact that what seems to be a separate introduction happened in Canada, where it did establish and create a colony, is really what's concerning to us, because it means that we have some other work to do that's kind of out of our control, making sure the stuff isn't coming over to begin with. It's hard enough to mop up after it gets here, but we also have to do that front end work overseas as well.
I think a large concern for anybody on the West Coast is the I-5 corridor. And so if it's a possibility that they got on a container ship to cross the ocean, it's the greater possibility they'll just jump on any of the number of trucks that just go up and down I-5 constantly, from all the way from Vancouver all the way down to San Diego, farther south.
Right. And for that reason, we've been working with our Washington Department of Transportation to at least get posters and hopefully some traps up at the rest areas and things like that as well. But we're actually really concerned for their roadside crews, because with the kind of equipment they operate, they could be on top of a nest before they even know what they're dealing with. And so just getting them educated is kind of one of the main priorities right now as well.
Yeah, thankfully, most of those tractors I've seen all have the enclosed cab, so that's at least a saving grace on that front.
A quick question: the size of these ground nests, and the numbers of individuals at peak population about.
Okay, so at peak population, they basically make these stacked brood cells, if you will, and the cells are large. They're about 2 feet in diameter. So picture a 2 foot frisbee, and there could be 6 to 7 of those stacked up. And so you're looking at an area 2 by 2, if you will, underneath the ground, and there could be up to 1,000 individuals in each nest.
So they're stacking like a typical hornet's nest. They're stacking the layers, but they're not enclosing them in a shell.
Correct.
Okay, they're in a cavity. They're in a cavity, but they're not enclosed in a paper shell. I'm not going.
Right.
Okay. So 1,000 individuals. That's a lot, but it's not a huge number. I'm going to guess that there isn't a tremendous amount of activity going on around the opening of the nest any time of the day.
No, I don't imagine there is any activity at all going on around the opening of a nest. They actually defend it pretty vigorously.
So the people that are dealing with roadside machinery aren't going to see this because it just isn't at all obvious.
Yeah.
Well, there is one thing, because the queen starts out in kind of a small cell. She doesn't start out in something that's like a 4-foot void in the ground. They do actually excavate dirt out, so there will be a dirt patch or a mound of dirt like any other kind of animal hole. And so we believe we can, if we can train folks to identify these. The thing of it is we haven't seen one in person, so we don't have but just a few photographs of these from Japan right now.
With the number of pocket gophers around here on this side of the state, I mean, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So actually, when we investigated the farmer who was mowing, when we investigated the wood line that he came out of just a month or so ago, there were actually several that looked like they could have been a hornet's nest. So we're looking at voids below trees that have blown over. And this is what we're told is kind of a typical area where these would nest. There are several that look like they might have been a nest at some point, but there was no evidence like dead bodies or comb inside. So I think we can get a search pattern and probably figure out what they look like eventually. But I don't know. After a long day of mowing, I don't know that you would be too vigilant unless you had already been attacked once.
When you say a tree that's blown over, you're talking about the roots and the soil on the roots and that part of the tree, right?
Right. So yeah. It'll leave a little void, and boy, where his tractor was attacked, there were several cavities like that that would have been perfect.
Well, something for folks to think about and look for.
Yeah. Well,
what have we missed?
I don't know. I don't know if I want to hear any more this week.
Just be thankful that we caught it seemingly early.
Yes.
As huge and as scary as this is, we kind of believe if there were tons of these flying around, people would have been talking about them already. I mean, I just showed you, the video shot, and it really doesn't do it justice. You have to see it in person. But I mean, if people saw these flying around, I have to think we would have heard about it. So we're dealing with an early infestation, and you always have a chance, even if it's a slim one, you do have a chance.
Well,
watch your hummingbird feeders. Not all.
Keep a good thought there, yeah. Well, this has been fascinating and scary, and I'm glad I don't have to put up with it. But all the information you guys have provided already has given us a heads up on what to look for and what to think about and what to do if you see one bouncing off your window, trying to sting your windshield.
Yeah. So, and that's just, I like to leave all audiences with this message. You're out there all the time. You understand what is supposed to be there. When you see something out of the ordinary or something that doesn't look right, never hurts to turn it in, even if it's dirt common to the person you turn it into. You never know. It could be the next spotted lanternfly, the next Asian giant hornets, the next whatever. That's how a lot of these things get turned in. And the sooner we can get on top of it, the better a chance we have to deal with it.
Excellent advice.
Well,
perfect.
Yeah. We'll leave it at that. Sven, we really appreciate you being on the show today. And best of luck this season. And look forward to having you back and maybe having an audio postcard from you some point to give us an update on the Asian Giant Hornet in Washington State.
Actually, we'd like to have you back when you get rid of it and spread the good news.
Absolutely. Hope to be back for that.
Good. That would be good. Okay. This has been great. Thanks, you guys. So much.
All right.
You bet. Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Will do. Well, the only thing I can say is just, wow. I mean, the Varroa is one thing, COVID-19 is another thing, and now we got these Asian Giant Hornets. I don't know what to say. It's something else.
One of the names for them is Yak-Killer.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Hornets big enough to kill a yak. I really, really want you guys to keep them out there, okay?
Oh.
Don't ship them east.
I'm hoping that they find out that they're not really migrating south. A quarter-inch stinger. Wow, a quarter-inch stinger.
And a ground nester. And 300 queens per nest they put out. 300. Well, this was enlightening for sure. I'm a lot more confident that I'll be able to recognize them when I see one, providing I have to see one. And I know that there are ways to deal with them. But boy, I sure don't want to have to add one more thing to my list of stuff to do with things hassling my bees.
Oh, you won't have any doubt when you see it because it'll look like a miniature Tonka truck is what it's going to look like. Oh, my God.
Yeah, well, I want to say one thing, Jeff, before we go. Getting a hold of this guy, I'm glad you did it. And it's good that we've got a good lead on what's coming down the road. So good move on your part getting this guy.
Well, thanks. Yeah, no, I was happy for Sven to be on the show, and it was really interesting to, as we went along, he became a little bit less guarded as an official of the state, and you could really tell that he was impressed by these insects as well, and that was interesting. That about wraps it up for this podcast. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their sponsorship of Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else, Kim?
Well, I think folks should check out the Hive Butler. Take a look at that thing. It's a unique piece of equipment.
Sounds good. Check it out. We'll see you later.
All right. Take it easy, Jeff. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.